There's simply nothing better than to climb out onto a rock and sit for hours with nothing in sight but sea and sky. Although the rhythm of the waves beats a kind of time, it's not clock or calendar time. It has no urgency. It's timeless time. Because I know I'm listening to a rhythm which has been just the same for millions of years.
Welcome to Being in the Way, the Alan Watts podcast. I'm your host, Mark Watts, and today we're going to listen to a very interesting and historic recording. It was made a few weeks after he moved on to the ferryboat Vallejo in Sausalito, California, and it's a unique talk because it's an experiment. It was one of the first talks that he did for the radio that was not recorded in a radio booth. In it, he talks about and celebrates his love of the aquatic life along the waterfront in Sausalito, and he talks about the different kinds of time. Time indicated by the lapping of waves versus the marching time of human civilization. This was also one of the first recordings that he made with a Nagra tape deck that the station and his supporters had bought for him, portable high-quality Swiss deck that we still have and use today. And it marks a departure for his entire Way Beyond the West radio series from a fairly reserved, more academic tone that was the product of the radio booth right next to the University of California, to a more casual and indeed experimental style. In this recording, he experimented with recording some of the sounds that he heard along the waterfront, the sound of the gulls, the lapping of the waves at the foot of the ferryboat, and the sounds made by the nearby harbor. This is one of the many recordings that you will hear here on the podcast and also on our Play channel. Play.alanwatts.org is a new streaming channel that we've set up where you can enjoy these talks in an uninterrupted and pure fashion without commercials or even an announcer. And you'll hear a rich selection of 50 or more talks at any time. If you're interested, go to play.alanwatts.org for a full selection. This podcast is produced in cooperation with the Ram Dass Be Here Now podcast network, and our music is by Zakir Hussain, courtesy of Moment Records. So here's Alan Watts in Love of Waters, one of the first recordings made with his Nagra tape deck, and the very first made aboard his ferryboat, the SS Vallejo, in 1963 in Sausalito, California. Love of Waters.
Do you mind if I talk for a while about something I love? About water and the ocean. Ever since I can remember anything at all, the light, the smell, the sound and motion of the sea has been pure magic. Even the mere intimation of its presence. Gulls flying a little way inland. The quality of light in the sky beyond hills which screen it from view. The lowing of foghorns in the night. If ever I have to get away from it all, and in the words of a Chinese poet, wash all the wrongs of life from my pores, there's simply nothing better than to climb out onto a rock and sit for hours with nothing in sight but sea and sky. Although the rhythm of the waves beats a kind of time, it's not clock or calendar time. It has no urgency. It's timeless time. Because I know I'm listening to a rhythm which has been just the same for millions of years. And it takes you out of the world of relentlessly ticking clocks. Clocks, for some reason or other, always seem to be marching. And armies never march to anything but doom. But there's no marching rhythm in the motion of waves. It harmonizes with the breath. It does not count our days. Its pulse is not in the stingy spirit of measuring, of marking out how much still remains. It's the breathing of eternity, like the Brahma of Indian mythology, who inhales and exhales, manifests and dissolves the worlds, endlessly, forever. As a mere conception, that sounds appallingly monotonous, until you listen to the breaking and washing of waves. Just in the past few weeks, I've come to live right on the edge of the water. I have a studio, library, and place for writing in an old ferry boat, tied up on the waterfront of Sausalito, north of San Francisco. I suppose the nearest thing in America to a Mediterranean fishing village. Steep hills, clustered with little houses. And below, along the rim of the bay, a forest of masts, rocking almost imperceptibly against a background of water and wooded promontories. In some ways, it's rather a messy waterfront, not just piers and boats, but junkyards, industrial buildings, and all the inevitable literature of our culture. But somehow the land and seascape absorbs and pacifies the mess. Sheds and shacks thrown together out of old timbers and plywood, heaps of disused lumber, rusted machinery, and rotting hulls. All of this is transformed in the beneficent presence of the sea. Perhaps it's the quality of the light, especially early in the morning and towards evening, when the distinction of sky and water becomes uncertain, when the whole of space becomes opalescent, the sort of pearly luminous grey, and the rising or setting moon is straw yellow. In this light, all the rambling mess of sheds and junkyards is magical. Blessed with the white cries of gulls, and with the patterns of masts and ropes and boats at anchor, which put me in mind of landfalls a long way away, and of all the voyages of which one has dreamed. I look out now as I talk to you, across a wide space of nothing but water and birds, ending in a line of green slopes with clumps of trees. Right over the edge of the boat, the water contains, seemingly just under the surface, a ceaselessly moving network of reflected sunlight, through which a school of very tiny fish passes delightfully uncaught, and yet only a few yards from where we are moored. Tackle shops sell the marvelous salmon and crabs with which this particular area abounds. This is the paradox of the ocean. Sand, flying spray, pebbles and shells, driftwood, sparkling water, space incredibly luminous, with cloud banks along horizons, underlying skies into which one's imagination can reach forever. But under the surface of both sky and water, there's the grim business of preying. Men and birds against fish, fish against fish. The tortuous process of life continuing by the painful transformation of one form into another. To creatures who don't anticipate and reflect imaginatively upon this holocaust of eating and being eaten, it's perhaps not so terrible. But poor man, skillful beyond all other animals, by being able to think in time and knowing the future. He dies before he's dead. He shrinks from the shark's teeth before they bite him. He dreads the alien germ long, long before its banquet begins. Here is a gull that has picked a crab from a tide pool sprawled now upon the sand. The crab shrinks from the walls of its shell, resounding to the tap, tap, tap of the gull's beak. Who's that knocking at my door? I suppose the shell of the crab, the clam or the mussel, is the boundary of its universe. To put ourselves in their position, we should have to imagine a knocking sound, louder and louder, that doesn't come from anywhere in particular, from the door or the walls or the ceiling or the floor. Think of a knocking that comes from everywhere, that beats against the boundaries of space and consciousness, that comes as the intrusion of an utterly unknown dimension into our own familiar world. Let me in. Let me in. I love you so much I could eat you. I love you to the very core, especially the soft, juicy parts, the vitals most tender and alive. Surrender to this agony, and you will be transformed into me. Dying to yourself, you will become alive as me. We shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, on the morning when the last trumpet sounds. For behold, I am he that stands at the door and knocks. There's no way of getting around it, is there? The gull isn't rapacious or greedy. It's just that his being alive at all is the same thing as eating crabs. Seabirds are transformations of fish. Men are transformations of wheat, chickens, and steers. And the love for the food is the agony of the food. To object to this inseparability of pleasure and pain, life and death, is simply to object to existence. But of course, we cannot help objecting when the time comes. Objecting to pain is pain. So far as we know, the gull and the fish don't philosophize. They enjoy life when they're eating it and hate it when being eaten. They don't reflect upon the process as a whole and say how rough it is that we have to work so hard for a living, or it's just hell having to wash out all the time for those gulls. I'm sure that in their world, this is something that just goes along with life, like having eyes or feet. But man, with his astonishing ability to stand aside from himself and think about himself, in short, to comment on life, man has done something which confuses his own existence down to its roots. For the more sensitive he is, the more man finds the very act of living in conflict with his moral conscience. Upon reflection, a universe so arranged that there is no way of living except by destroying other lives seems to be a hideous mistake. Not a divine, but a devilish creation. Of course, there's the myth that once upon a time things were quite otherwise. That there was no death, that the lion lay down with the lamb. But that since then there has been a fall, a vast error which has corrupted the whole of nature. All that must have been eons ago. Perhaps in some other galaxy where the conditions of life were quite different. Or perhaps the ghastly mistake was just that step in man's evolution which made it possible for him to comment, to reflect upon life as a whole. In being able to stand aside from life and think about it, he put himself outside it and found it alien. Perhaps thinking about the world and objecting to its whole principle are simply two aspects of the same mechanism. The very words suggest, don't they? Perhaps we must object to everything that becomes an object. aren't there also times when we speak of something that we know as a subject, the subject of this book, the subject I am now studying? Would it be possible to subject to life instead of objecting to it? Is this playing with words, or does it possibly mean something? Now, if the gulls and the fish don't philosophize, they have no consciousness of life being either good as a whole or bad as a whole. So when we philosophize and pity the poor fish, that's just our problem. From its own standpoint, the world of animals and insects doesn't find itself problematic at all. There's not the slightest evidence to suggest it. On the contrary, I'm inclined to feel that all these creatures really swing and go on living up to the very moment when the game is no longer worth the candle. I'm quite sure they don't lecture each other about their duties or worry about where they're going when they're dead. Isn't it then rather an enormous relief for us men to see that the plant and animal world is no problem to itself, and that we are wasting intellectual energy in making moral judgments about it? But, of course, we can't return to the unreflective consciousness of the animal world without becoming animals. To be human is precisely to have that extra circuit of consciousness which enables us to know that we know, and thus to take an attitude to all that we experience. The mistake that we've made, and this, if anything, is the fall of man, is to suppose that that extra circuit, that ability to take an attitude to life as a whole, is the same as actually standing aside and being separate from what we see. We seem to feel that the thing which knows that it knows is one's essential self. That, in other words, our personal identity is entirely on the side of the commentator. We forget that self-consciousness is simply a subordinate part and instrument of our being, a sort of mental counterpart to the finger-thumb opposition of the human hand. And which is you, the finger or the thumb? Look at the stages of differentiation. First, the organism from its environment, and with this, knowledge of the environment. Second, the distinction of knowing knowledge from knowledge itself. But all this, like the finger-thumb opposition, is a difference which does not divide. The thumb isn't floating in the air alongside the rest of the hand. At their roots, they're joined. And at our roots, we are joined to the whole subject of nature. Of course, you may say that nature or the universe is just a big abstraction. But tell me, is an orange just an abstraction from its component molecules? I think our difficulty is that our consciousness is too superficial, as if all our sensation were in the tips of the fingers and not in the palm. Our comments on life are insufficiently balanced by the clear sensation that what we are talking about is ourselves, and ourselves in a sense far more basic and real than that extra circuit which knows knowing. Are we misled by the fact that we move freely on the earth and aren't rooted to it in the same way as trees to the ground and fingers to the hand? were we as spatially distant from the Earth as one atom of an orange from another, I suppose we should be somewhere out by the moon. Now we know that the atom, molecule, cell, or subordinate organ of any particular organism is what it is by virtue of its place and its membership in the pattern of the whole. Blood in a test tube is rapidly ceasing to be the same thing as blood in veins. In the same way, man must beware lest in cutting himself off psychically from the world that he sees, and so isolating the subject from the object, lest in doing this he rapidly ceases to be man. So I think this is why I love the ocean. It's the most difficult part of nature to mess up with emblems and symptoms of man's dissociated consciousness. It's an environment in which the awareness of our roots can awaken, in which space, so real because of the light and color, can be seen to be joining things instead of separating them. Yes.
You've been listening to Love of Waters, a very special recording that was made in 1963. It was made on the waterfront, as you may have noticed during this program. And it's one of many recordings available here on the podcast and also from play.alanwatts.org, which is a streaming channel we've set up. The channel is also available on the Alan Watts app, which you can download on Apple or on Android. And it gives listeners a way to enjoy the programs without interruption and also a chance to support us in the making of these programs. Our thanks to the Ram Dass Foundation for its support through the Be Here Now podcast network, and to our engineer Corey Leonard, who did the mix for today's program.
Have you ever noticed that the more you try to figure life out, the less you seem to understand it? You sit there, head full of thoughts, tracing circles in your mind, trying to make sense of everything, what to do, what to say, where to go, how to become who you think you should be. You believe that if you could only think a little harder, if you could only solve the puzzle, peace would finally arrive. But the harder you think, the farther peace seems to drift. Because the mind, for all its brilliance, is a terrible place to live when it won't stop moving. Overthinking is one of the quietest prisons in the modern world. You can't see the bars, yet they surround you. You can't hear the locks, yet they click into place every time you question yourself again. What if I'm wrong? What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? The mind loops and loops, convinced that control will bring safety, unaware that control is the very thing causing its suffering. You become trapped in the illusion that understanding more will make life easier, when in truth, life only feels heavy because you keep trying to carry it with thought alone. There's a strange irony here. The same mind that creates the problem is the one you rely on to fix it. You keep asking the overactive mind to think its way out of its own confusion, like asking a storm to calm itself by blowing harder. It's an endless cycle analysis. Doubt, reassurance, then more analysis again. And though you tell yourself you're being careful or responsible, what you're really being is afraid. Fear hides behind thought. Every overthinker is at heart someone trying to feel safe. You don't want to make a mistake, don't want to be hurt, don't want to lose control, but the more you try to avoid pain by planning around it, the more you live in the shadow of it. Life becomes one long rehearsal for a moment that never comes. You're preparing to live instead of living. And so, your mind keeps spinning, always revisiting the past, always predicting the future, rarely allowing you to be here, in the only place life actually happens. You might sit at a cafe, coffee in hand, sunlight spilling through the window, yet your body is the only part of you that's present. Your thoughts are somewhere else entirely, chasing what-ifs and should-haves. You've forgotten what it means to simply exist. The problem isn't that you think. Thinking is beautiful when it's used as a tool. The problem is that you don't know how to put the tool down. The modern mind has become addicted to solving. It treats every sensation, every emotion, every uncertainty as something to fix. But not everything broken needs mending. Some things are only asking to be felt. Imagine standing by a river. The current is strong, and you drop a small leaf into it. You watch as the water carries it effortlessly downstream. That's how life moves when you stop resisting it. But if you try to catch the leaf, to control where it goes, the moment you grab at it, you disturb the water. The surface ripples, and what was once simple becomes messy. Overthinking does the same. It disturbs the current of being. You've likely noticed that the best insights, the most peaceful moments, come not when you're trying to think your way toward them, but when you've finally given up. It's when you stop struggling, when you let go of the mental tug of war, that clarity suddenly appears, like sunlight breaking through clouds that were never solid to begin with. But most people don't trust that process. They believe that letting go means becoming passive, lazy, or careless. In truth, it's the opposite. Letting go is the highest form of intelligence. It's the moment you stop trying to make life obey you and instead begin to listen to it. Because life, like music, was never meant to be figured out. It was meant to be played. Think of how you listen to your favorite song. You don't analyze every note or measure. You let it wash through you. You feel it, and that's why you enjoy it. But when you turn life into a problem to solve, you lose the melody. You start dissecting beauty instead of dancing with it. Overthinking blocks the life you want because it builds a wall between experience and awareness. You can't taste a meal while describing it in your head. You can't love deeply while questioning whether you're doing it right. You can't live fully while narrating your every move. The commentary becomes louder than the life itself. The truth is, your mind will never think its way into peace because thought is born from division, from the sense of me and the world, this and that, should and shouldn't. Real peace can only appear when that division ends, when you stop seeing life as something to manage and start seeing it as something to meet. When you are caught in overthinking, you live in delay. Every moment is postponed until the next decision is made, the next question answered. But life doesn't wait for conclusions. It unfolds now. It moves with or without your permission. You can spend your entire life preparing for it and never actually meet it. Some people spend years waiting to start, waiting until they feel ready, confident, healed, certain. But readiness never arrives in the way they imagine. Certainty is not the gate to life. It is the grave of possibility. The more you demand to know before acting, the smaller your world becomes. To live freely, you must be willing to not know. You must dare to walk without a map, because the truth is, the mind can only plan based on what it already knows, and what it already knows is too small for what life wants to give you. The overthinker never leaves the circle of familiarity. They keep spinning inside the known, terrified of stepping into the unknown, unaware that the unknown is where life actually begins. What if the life you want is already here, hidden beneath the noise of your thoughts? What if the freedom you seek is not somewhere in the future, but waiting quietly beneath all the analyzing, the worrying, the self-questioning? What if the only thing separating you from peace is the belief that you must earn it through understanding? At some point, every overthinker reaches a breaking point, that sacred exhaustion, where the mind finally admits defeat. You can't think anymore. You can't plan anymore. You've tried every angle, every solution, and still, life doesn't obey your designs. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. You stop fighting. You stop thinking your way out. And for the first time, you simply breathe. In that breath, the fog begins to lift. You realize that the peace you were chasing wasn't hidden in answers. It was hidden in stillness. The answers were never the destination. They were the distraction. What you were searching for was not knowledge, but silence, the kind that doesn't come from solving, but from seeing. To overthink is to live half a life, to exist in potential but never in presence. You wait for a perfect understanding that will never come. Meanwhile, life waits for you to return to it. When you finally do, when you let the noise fall away, you discover that you were never truly lost. You were simply too loud inside to hear the quiet truth beneath it all. That life does not need your permission to unfold. It only needs your attention. And when that attention returns to the present moment, even for a breath, everything shifts. The problems shrink. The noise softens. You realize the river was never against you, it was carrying you all along. There comes a moment, somewhere after the storm of thought has exhausted itself, when silence doesn't feel like emptiness anymore. It feels like home. You sit quietly and realize that all along, the noise wasn't protecting you, it was hiding you from yourself. You thought thinking would make you stronger, safer, wiser. But now, in the stillness that follows all that effort, you see that wisdom was never waiting inside your thoughts. It was waiting beneath them. The mind believes that if it keeps running, it can outrun fear. But fear is not behind you, it is the very motion of running itself. You can't escape fear by thinking faster, planning harder, or knowing more. The more you run from uncertainty, the more it defines you. True peace begins when you stop trying to outrun life and instead allow it to catch up with you. Overthinking is a symptom of mistrust. You don't trust life to unfold without your supervision, so you hover over it like a nervous parent, constantly correcting, anticipating, preparing. But the beauty of existence is that it doesn't need to be managed. The flowers bloom without being told how. The stars move without instruction. The heart beats without your permission. You are part of that same intelligence, yet you spend your days doubting it. You might say, if I stop thinking, I'll make mistakes. But mistakes are part of the dance. They are not interruptions, they are steps. Every so-called mistake you've ever made was life moving you towards something you couldn't yet see. If you look closely, you'll notice that some of your most painful wrong turns became the very paths that revealed your strength. Overthinking tries to prevent mistakes, but in doing so, it prevents growth. To live without overthinking is not to live without thought. It's to let thought play its proper role as a servant, not a master. When a thought is needed, it arises. When it's done, it dissolves. The problem is not in thinking, but in identifying with the thinker. When you believe you are your thoughts, you drown in them. But when you see that you are the awareness noticing them, suddenly they lose their power. They pass through you like clouds across a vast sky. To rest in that awareness is to see thoughts for what they are, temporary movements in something much larger, much quieter, much freer than the mind. Once you begin to live from that space, life stops feeling like a problem to be solved and starts feeling like an experience to be lived. You no longer wake up with the need to control every outcome. You start to notice the subtle rhythm that runs beneath everything, the way events unfold, the way timing seems to align when you stop forcing it. It's as if life had been waiting for you to stop interfering. This is where real intelligence begins. Not the kind measured by speed or logic, but by depth, by the ability to listen. The universe is always speaking, but most people can't hear it over the noise of their own analysis. When you quiet down, the guidance you were searching for begins to emerge naturally, not as a voice from above, but as intuition, a quiet knowing that moves through you like wind through leaves. You don't have to think your way into it. You simply allow it. You trust that life, like breath, knows what it's doing. You inhale, you exhale, and everything takes care of itself. Overthinking says, I must make life happen. Awareness whispers, life is already happening. And the difference between those two is the difference between struggle and flow. There's a certain magic in surrendering to that flow. You start noticing how everything connects, how every person you meet, every obstacle you face, every moment of doubt or delay fits into a larger tapestry that the mind could never have designed. Overthinking reduces life to fragments. Awareness restores it to wholeness. You begin to see that nothing was ever missing. The job you didn't get, the person who left, the opportunity that slipped away, they weren't mistakes. They were movements in a pattern too vast to grasp from where you stand. Overthinking tries to flatten that mystery into a straight line. But life is a circle. Everything returns in its own form, in its own time. When you understand this, you begin to relax. You begin to breathe differently. You stop asking life for guarantees and start meeting it as it is. That's when the overthinking mind finally dissolves, not because you've conquered it, but because you've outgrown it. You've learned that control is a poor substitute for trust. And here's the great paradox. When you stop trying to control everything, things actually begin to align. Not because the world suddenly bends to your will, but because your will no longer resists the world. You move with life instead of against it. You act not from fear, but from clarity. This is what people mean when they talk about flow, that effortless harmony between doing and being. It's the artist painting without self-consciousness, the athlete lost in motion, the child playing without purpose. It's the moment when the watcher and the watched become one. And the beautiful part is that it's not rare. It's not reserved for special people. It's the natural state of being that overthinking has simply obscured. Once the noise quiets, you realize the stillness was there all along. The mind will still whisper from time to time. It will still ask, are you sure? What if this goes wrong? But now you see those questions for what they are, old echoes of a self that believed it needed control to feel safe. You can smile at them, thank them for their concern, and move on. The mind becomes a companion rather than a captor. Eventually, you come to see that life's wisdom was never hidden in complexity, but in simplicity. You don't need more certainty. You don't need more answers. You need less noise. Peace is not something you find after thinking through every possibility. It's what remains when the thinking stops and awareness begins. It's what arises when you no longer stand between yourself and life. So when your mind starts spinning again, when it replays old conversations or rehearses endless outcomes, pause. Don't fight it. Just notice it. Watch the current of thought without diving in. Feel the body breathing, the heart beating, the presence underneath it all. In that moment, something ancient wakes within you. You remember that you were never the storm. You were the sky. And the sky does not need to stop the storm to remain at peace. It only needs to remember its own vastness. This is the essence of living beyond overthinking, not that you control the mind, but that you no longer confuse yourself with it. You let thoughts come, you let them go, and in between, you live. You finally live. Because the life you've been trying so hard to figure out was never waiting for you to think your way into it. It was waiting for you to feel your way back into now. And when you arrive, really arrive, you realize that life had never gone anywhere. You were the one lost in thought. The river never stopped flowing. You just stopped trusting it. And now you can float again. You know, it's a strange thing, this business of trying. From the moment we are little children, we are told, try your best. Teachers tell us that. Parents tell us that. Even priests and preachers tell us that. Try to be good, try to be better, try to succeed, try to make something of yourself. And so we grow up under this spell, this hypnotic chant of try harder, try more, try again. But have you ever stopped and asked yourself, what is it you're really trying for? What is it that effort is supposed to achieve? Because if you look at it closely, what you'll notice is that most of our trying has nothing to do with life itself. It's all about becoming something we are not. The harder we try to be someone, the more we affirm that we are not that someone already. When you strive to be peaceful, it means you believe you are not peaceful. When you struggle to be spiritual, it means you've decided you are not spiritual enough. And so the trying, you see, secretly keeps alive the very thing you are trying to escape. Now, there's a marvelous trick in nature, a kind of cosmic joke, where the moment you stop pushing so hard, things begin to happen on their own. When you stop trying to be happy, you notice that you're actually fine. When you stop trying to be loved, you realize you already are. And when you stop trying to be someone, life begins to express itself through you quite effortlessly. But of course, the word effortless terrifies us. We've been told that laziness is a sin, that to do nothing is to waste time. And so even when we try to relax, we sit there, teeth clenched, saying to ourselves, all right, I'm going to let go now. You can almost hear the tension of the person trying to be relaxed. It's like a man lifting a heavy weight, saying, I must surrender, I must surrender. You see the absurdity of it. The harder you try to let go, the more you're holding on. And this is why so many people are exhausted, spiritually exhausted, emotionally drained, physically worn out, because they are trying to be something that they already are. You know, there's an old saying from the East, you cannot step into the same river twice. And that's true not just of rivers, but of ourselves. Every moment, life is flowing through you. You're not a fixed object trying to become something else. You're an ongoing movement of energy, a pattern that keeps unfolding. The trouble is, we've been conditioned to believe that if we stop trying, we'll fall apart. That if we let go, everything will collapse. But look around, the birds aren't trying to sing, the flowers aren't trying to bloom, the stars aren't trying to shine. And yet somehow, it all happens. The grass doesn't force itself to grow. The tide doesn't push against the shore saying, I must reach higher. Trying, you see, is something the human mind invented to defend itself from uncertainty. Because the truth is, we don't know. We don't know what will happen next. And so we try to build a little fortress of control, made of effort, made of tension, made of fear, disguised as determination. And what happens? We wake up one day and we're tired. Tired of improving, tired of fixing, tired of becoming, tired of this endless climb toward a horizon that never seems to arrive. And at that moment, that beautiful, desperate moment, something inside begins to whisper, what if I didn't have to try anymore? Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying you shouldn't act. Life is full of action. When the tree grows, it moves, it acts, it expresses. But its movement is not a strain. It's a spontaneous response to life. The same energy that makes your heart beat and your lungs breathe is the energy that moves the stars. You don't tell your heart to keep pumping, do you? It does it by itself. So when you're tired of trying, what you're really tired of is resisting that natural rhythm. You're tired of swimming upstream in a river that never asked you to. You're tired of fighting the current of your own nature. And you see, we humans have made a religion out of resistance. We glorify struggle, we call it ambition, progress, achievement, but no one tells you that ambition can become a prison, progress can become pressure, and achievement can become a constant reminder that you are not yet enough. So what if we dropped this idea, this feverish belief that life is a ladder to climb? What if there's no ladder at all? What if life is a dance, and you've been trying to march to a rhythm that was never meant to be marched to? You can't dance well if you're trying to control every step. You dance by listening, by feeling the rhythm move through you. The music, you see, is already playing. But most people are too busy trying to get to the end of the song. You've noticed this in conversations, haven't you? People aren't really listening. They're waiting for their turn to speak. They're trying to say something profound, something clever, something that will make them feel seen. But the irony is, the most alive moments happen when you stop trying to be interesting and simply become interested. When you stop trying to be spiritual, you find that spirituality is just being. When you stop trying to be enlightened, you find that awareness was already here. The effort obscures the very thing you're seeking. And this is the strange paradox of all human effort. You can't get there by trying, because the moment you try, you've already confirmed that you're not there. It's like saying, I'm going to relax. The very statement is self-contradictory. Relaxation happens when you no longer need to achieve it. But we live in a world that doesn't trust that. We've built systems on striving, education, religion, economics, all designed to reward effort and punish surrender. We measure worth by productivity, value by output. The whole thing is a beautiful machine that runs on human exhaustion. And then we wonder why we feel empty. When you're tired of trying, that emptiness is not failure, it's awakening. It's life whispering, come home. You don't need to run anymore. Think of a fruit ripening on a tree. It doesn't rush. It doesn't say, I must become sweet by Friday. It ripens because it cannot do otherwise. And when the time comes, it falls. Not out of effort, but out of readiness. The universe, my dear friend, has been ripening you in just the same way. Every frustration, every failure, every time you've said, I can't do this anymore, is a moment of ripening, a softening of the hard shell of control. And perhaps you've noticed, the most beautiful moments in your life never came from trying. They came from being caught off guard, a sunset you didn't plan to see, a laugh you didn't force, a kindness you didn't expect. Those are glimpses of what happens when you stop trying and start living. You see, there's a great difference between effort and energy. Effort is what the ego does when it doesn't trust life. Energy is what life does when it trusts itself. When you're in love, truly in love, you don't try to love, you just love. When you're inspired, you don't try to create. You create because something inside you overflows. So when you say, I'm tired of trying, perhaps what you're really saying is, I'm ready to trust. Trust that life knows what it's doing through you. Trust that you don't have to hold the steering wheel of existence. Trust that what you call chaos is simply order too vast for your mind to grasp. The ocean doesn't need your permission to move the tide. The stars don't wait for you to finish your to-do list before they rise. And you, this strange little ripple of consciousness, are not separate from all that. You are that. You are the same force that breathes galaxies into being, now wearing human skin. And that, you see, is the punchline of this cosmic joke. The one who's been trying so hard to live was life itself, pretending to be separate. And the moment you stop trying to be what you already are, you laugh, as all wise men do, at the sheer simplicity of it. You were never behind, you were never off track, you were never failing. You were simply playing the game of becoming until you remembered that being was enough. Now, when one has truly seen the exhaustion of trying, something very quiet begins to happen. It is not a decision you make. It is not even something you can do. It is more like the way dusk falls over a restless city. Slowly, gently, and without permission, a kind of stillness descends. The mind that has been racing to get somewhere begins to stumble and at last sits down. And for the first time, perhaps in many years, there is silence. You see, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of resistance. It is the moment you no longer feel compelled to hold yourself together. And in that silence, something rather beautiful begins to unfold. You start to see that life has been moving perfectly well all along without your constant interference. When you let go of the compulsion to manage every outcome, you begin to notice an intelligence at work that is infinitely wiser than the one in your head. Call it nature, call it Tao, call it God, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that you begin to see how it operates. You begin to see that the same power that makes a seed split open in the darkness of the soil is the power that moves through you when you breathe, when you smile, when you weep. And when you trust that, you find a deep rest, a rest far beyond sleep. Because sleep, you see, is rest for the body, but surrender is rest for the soul. We have been educated to think that if we stop trying, life will fall apart. But the truth is exactly the opposite. When you stop trying, life begins to hold you. When you stop gripping the rope so tightly, you realize the river was carrying you all along. And this is not passivity. This is participation of a higher order. When a musician plays the flute beautifully, they are not forcing the music. They are allowing it. They have practiced, yes, but at the moment of performance, they disappear into the sound. The breath moves through them. The melody plays itself. That is not effort. That is grace. And so it is with life. The art of living is the art of allowing the music of existence to play through you without interference. It is the art of alignment rather than control. When the mind is quiet, the heart moves naturally toward what is right. You don't have to force kindness. It arises. You don't have to force clarity. It appears. You don't have to force purpose. It reveals itself in the very act of living. But this simplicity frightens the modern man. He says, if I do nothing, I will become nothing. Yet have you noticed? The more we do, the more we lose touch with being. We fill our days with effort and our nights with noise, and then wonder why peace feels so far away. When you stop trying, you begin to rediscover what peace actually is. Not the peace of achievement or escape, but the peace that is here, even in the middle of the storm. That peace does not depend on conditions. It is not something you earn. It is your natural state, uncovered when the mind stops struggling to fix what was never broken. Think of a muddy pond. When the water is agitated, you cannot see your reflection. But when it becomes still, everything becomes clear. The clarity was never created, it was always there. The mud was only motion. Now the same is true of your mind. You've been stirring it constantly with your effort, your worry, your self-improvement. The moment you stop stirring, clarity returns. You don't have to make the water still. You only have to stop disturbing it. And this is why so many of the great teachers throughout history have said, be still, not as a command, but as an invitation. Because stillness is not something you impose, it's something you allow. You see, trying is rooted in fear, but allowing is rooted in trust. Fear says, if I don't act, something terrible will happen. Trust says, whatever happens, I will meet it. And life, in its strange wisdom, tends to favor those who trust it. You begin to notice that when you stop forcing outcomes, events start to align in ways that seem almost miraculous. You meet the right person at the right moment. The opportunity you were chasing arrives when you've stopped chasing it. The solution that eluded you while you were anxious appears when you're calm. And you say, well, that was coincidence. But what if coincidence is simply life's way of saying, thank you for getting out of the way? You see, the universe is not against you. It's only against your resistance. When you drop resistance, everything starts to move with you instead of against you. The wind that once felt like an obstacle becomes the breeze that lifts your sail. And as you begin to live this way, you notice a transformation in the smallest details. Even your breath feels different. Even walking becomes effortless. You look at people differently, not as competitors, not as threats, but as mirrors. You realize everyone is struggling in their own way, everyone is trying so hard to be something, and you can almost laugh because you recognize yourself in them. And you begin to love them for it. Not from pity, but from understanding, because you've seen the futility of trying and the beauty of being. This understanding doesn't make you superior, it makes you simple. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to convince anyone of your progress. You can live quietly, contentedly, and fully, even in the midst of the world's noise. That is the beginning of true strength. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to surrender. Not the strength to conquer, but the strength to yield. Because in yielding, you become one with the very power you thought you had to control. And once you have tasted that, once you've seen that there is an intelligence moving through every heartbeat, through every leaf, through every smile and tear, you realize there was never any separate you to begin with. The one who was tired of trying was never real. It was a wave mistaking itself for the ocean. When that illusion fades, something very light remains. You begin to laugh more easily. You take things less seriously. You see that life has always been play, divine play. Serious only when you forget it's a game. And you see that your tiredness was never a sign of failure, but a sign of readiness. You were ready to stop pretending that life needed your constant correction. You were ready to trust the rhythm that has been carrying you since the beginning. So when you're tired of trying, stop. Sit quietly. Listen. You may hear, beneath all your thoughts, a small but steady pulse. That pulse is life itself. It has never abandoned you. It has never required your perfection. It only asks that you let it move as it will. For when you stop trying to live life, you realize life has been living you all along. And in that realization, effort dissolves into ease, fear dissolves into freedom, and the tired soul at last remembers its own timeless rest. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize you no longer know what you're doing. Not in the sense that you've forgotten your plans, but in the deeper sense when all the plans you've made stop making sense. You wake up one morning, and though nothing looks different, everything feels different. The job, the relationships, the daily routines, all the things that once gave you a sense of direction suddenly feel hollow, like a script you've memorized but no longer believe in. And the strangest thing about it is that it doesn't always come with sadness. Sometimes it's just a blankness, a strange, gentle emptiness, where the meaning used to be. You move through your day as though underwater, hearing people speak, watching yourself respond, but somewhere inside knowing that none of it feels alive anymore. This is the moment when most people panic, because for so long we've been taught that purpose is everything, that life must always be aimed towards something, a goal, a mission, a destination. We spend years building an identity around what we do, what we achieve, what we produce. So when the compass stops pointing anywhere, it feels like the end of something essential, but it isn't the end. It's the beginning. You see, this confusion, this uncertainty, is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. Life has a way of dissolving the structures we outgrow. It takes away the illusions we cling to until we finally notice that they were illusions. It removes the things we think we can't live without, and in doing so, reveals that we were never living through them to begin with. To not know what you're doing anymore is to stand at the threshold of a deeper truth, because only when the outer purpose collapses can the inner purpose emerge. Only when you stop knowing with your mind can you start listening with your being. Most people try to escape this stage. They distract themselves, fill the silence with noise, or rush to find a new project, a new meaning, a new dream to chase. But the more you run, the more lost you become. The feeling doesn't leave because it isn't meant to. It's not a symptom of something wrong. It's an invitation, a call from life itself to stop pretending you're in control. Think of the ocean. When the waves crash, The surface looks chaotic, unpredictable. But deep down, the water is still. When you lose your sense of direction, you are being pulled downward into that stillness. The storm of the mind begins to lose its power, and something quieter begins to appear beneath it. But because we've spent our lives identifying with the storm, we fear the calm. The mind says, if I stop chasing, I'll fall behind. If I stop knowing, I'll disappear. Yet the truth is that the one who feels lost was never the real you. The self that needs direction is only the surface self, the mask that performs for the world. The one beneath it doesn't need direction at all, because it never left home. This is why the ancient teachers spoke of the power of not knowing. Because to not know is to become teachable again. It is to return to innocence, not ignorance, but openness. The kind of awareness a child has when they look at the world without trying to control it. When you are no longer certain of what you're doing, life begins to show you what it's been doing all along. You begin to see that things move by themselves, that the heart beats, the lungs breathe, the planets spin, the seasons change, all without your interference. You begin to realize that the world is not asking you to manage it, it's asking you to participate in it, and there's a vast difference between the two. Participation means allowing yourself to be moved by life, not pushing it forward with effort and will. It's dancing with the rhythm rather than dictating the steps. And that's why losing your sense of direction can feel so disorienting, because you're shifting from being the choreographer to being the dancer. When you reach this stage, the mind tries to bargain. It says, if I can just understand what's happening, I'll feel safe again. But life doesn't owe you understanding. It offers you something far more profound experience. And understanding comes later, in the quiet moments when you realize that what felt like loss was actually transformation in disguise. Every meaningful change begins in confusion. Caterpillars do not know they are becoming butterflies. They simply dissolve. The same is true for you. The life you thought you were building is dissolving so that a more truthful one can emerge, not designed by your mind, but discovered by your being. So, when you find yourself in that fog, don't rush to clear it. Sit with it. Let it unfold at its own pace, because that fog is not a failure of clarity. It's the very process by which clarity arrives. You might look around and think everyone else knows what they're doing, but they don't. They're just better at pretending. Most people are following scripts written by fear, fear of being left behind, fear of insignificance, fear of stillness. You, however, have stepped off the stage. You've stopped acting long enough to hear the silence beneath the performance. And though it feels uncertain now, that silence is where the real music begins. Because the truth is, you don't need to know what you're doing to live a meaningful life. You only need to be here, aware, receptive, willing. The rest unfolds naturally. Think of how flowers bloom. They don't calculate the right moment. They open when the sun touches them. The same intelligence that moves the tides and births the stars is guiding your unfolding too. It doesn't need your constant interference. It needs your trust. This is the paradox of awakening, that we try so hard to find meaning, not realizing that meaning is what's trying to find us. It's been knocking on your door, waiting for you to stop rearranging the furniture long enough to hear it. You are not lost. You are simply being stripped of what can no longer come with you. And if you can stay open even when it hurts, even when it's unclear, you'll notice something miraculous happening. You'll stop trying to force the river and begin to flow with it. You'll realize that life was never something to solve, but something to experience. And then, without warning, you'll find yourself smiling again, not because you figured it out, but because you finally stopped trying to. You'll see that you were never meant to know every step of the path. You were only meant to walk it, one moment at a time, with wonder instead of control, with openness instead of certainty. And in that simple surrender, you'll rediscover something you forgot long ago, that not knowing is the most alive state there is. Because when you don't know what you're doing anymore, you are closer than ever to remembering who you really are. There comes a quiet moment after the confusion, when something in you stops struggling to make sense of it all. The mind, exhausted from trying to understand, begins to soften. And in that softening, you start to notice that life is still happening beautifully, rhythmically, indifferently. The trees still sway, the clouds still move, the wind still carries the scent of the earth. The same world that felt meaningless yesterday now begins to breathe with a strange kind of peace. Because the truth is, meaning never left you. You just buried it under the noise of needing to be someone. You thought purpose was something you could think your way into, when in fact it was something you could only return to. It was always there, beneath the tension, beneath the pretending, waiting for you to stop trying so hard to deserve it. There is an intelligence far older than your mind that has been guiding you since before you were born. It beats your heart. It grows your bones. It keeps you alive even when you forget to live. It doesn't need your permission or your plan. It only asks for your attention, not the kind that analyzes, but the kind that sees. You begin to realize that you were never supposed to figure life out, only to experience it fully. You were never supposed to have it all together. You were supposed to fall apart again and again until you saw that there was never anything to hold together in the first place. The falling was always part of the dance. When you stop trying to control the dance, life starts moving through you like music. You stop counting the steps. You start to feel the rhythm. And somewhere between the notes, between the breaths, you remember what you are. You are not the dancer. You are the dance itself. But this realization doesn't arrive with fireworks or revelation. It comes quietly, like the first light before dawn. You notice you're no longer rushing to escape yourself. You're no longer trying to trade this moment for another. You're simply here breathing, watching, existing. And that, you realize, has always been enough. You start to see that the moments you once called meaningless were never empty. They were simply unobserved. Life wasn't waiting to become significant. You were waiting to become present. And in that presence, even the smallest things begin to glow, the way sunlight dances on water, the way laughter spills out of nowhere, the way time slows down when you stop wishing it would move faster. These are not ordinary moments. They are the fabric of life itself, woven together by a quiet intelligence that asks for nothing in return. You once thought you needed a map to live. Now you realize you only needed to look around. You once believed you needed to understand your path. Now you see that the path itself was understanding you. Every detour, every delay, every collapse, it was all part of life's mysterious way of leading you home. You see, when you no longer know what you're doing, you finally allow life to do what it's been doing all along. You begin to trust the current instead of fighting it. You begin to rest, not in certainty, but in faith, not the kind of faith that believes in something, but the kind that simply allows everything. And it's here, in this quiet permission, that your life begins to breathe again. Because the truth is, clarity doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from accepting that you never will. Peace doesn't come from solving your problems. It comes from seeing that you are not a problem to solve. When you stop forcing yourself into shapes that please the world, you realize the world was never asking you to change. It was only reflecting back your own misunderstanding of who you are. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are not late to anything. You are exactly where you were always meant to be in this moment, aware, alive, unfolding. And perhaps that's what you were meant to learn all along, that life was never about becoming something, but about remembering that you already are everything you've been searching for. When this realization begins to settle in, you notice something beautiful. You no longer crave answers the way you used to. The questions remain, but they no longer torment you. They simply exist, like stars scattered across the night, silent, mysterious, and somehow perfect in their distance. You no longer need to define yourself because you understand that whatever can be defined is not truly you. You no longer cling to roles or labels because you sense how fluid you've always been. You no longer try to fix the uncertainty because you see now that uncertainty is the space where life breathes. You stop needing to be certain to be free. You stop needing to be someone to be whole. And when this happens, a quiet joy begins to bloom, not the loud joy of achievement, but the soft joy of belonging. Belonging to nothing in particular, yet everything at once. You realize you were never separate from the flow you were trying to control. You were the flow itself, dreaming it was lost. And so you sit there, not knowing what's next, and for the first time, that's perfectly fine, because you sense that whatever comes will come through you, not against you. You don't need to chase your next chapter. It's already writing itself, in the silence, in the waiting, in the very act of being alive. This is the grace of not knowing, that it leaves you open enough to finally see. You no longer have to pretend to be the one holding everything together. You can let go and trust that the hands of existence are far steadier than your own. And then, when you least expect it, life begins to move again, gently, effortlessly. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped blocking it. Not because you knew what to do, but because you allowed yourself to not know. You smile at the mystery of it all, the divine comedy of trying to plan infinity, and you understand that you were never lost. You were simply learning how to see again. So when you don't know what you're doing anymore, remember this: you don't need to. Life knows. It always has. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it whisper not in words, but in the rhythm of your own heart, that you are already home. After a while, you begin to notice that not knowing has its own kind of intelligence. It isn't confusion anymore. It's space, a vast, quiet openness that allows everything to be what it is. The mind, once frantic to decide and define, now learns to bow before something it cannot measure. At first, this feels disorienting, almost like losing the ground beneath your feet. You search for the next goal, the next explanation, the next identity that will anchor you again. But none of them fit. They feel too small, too artificial, too loud for the silence that's begun to bloom within you. So you stop chasing certainty, not out of defeat, but out of recognition. You realize that every certainty you've ever clung to has eventually dissolved, and yet something in you has remained untouched, unmoved, quietly aware. That awareness becomes your true home, your quiet refuge in the middle of life's noise. From that stillness, you begin to see the play more clearly. The constant striving, the endless self-improvement, the desperate need to prove your worth, all of it starts to look like a dream you finally awakened from. You smile, perhaps even laugh, at the absurdity of it. Because how could you ever improve upon something that was never broken? This realization does not make life dull. On the contrary, it makes everything radiant. When you stop trying to control the script, you begin to see the beauty of improvisation. You start to notice how every event, even the painful ones, carry a hidden rhythm, how each moment leads to the next, not through force, but through flow. You no longer see life as a staircase to climb, but as a river to enter. The river knows where it's going. You don't have to steer it. All you need to do is trust its current, and it will carry you exactly where you're meant to be. But trust is not passive. It is a living act. It means showing up without guarantees. It means stepping forward without knowing if the ground will appear beneath your feet. It means opening your heart, even when it has been broken before. It means daring to live without the armor of control, to love without the safety of certainty, to walk through the unknown as though it were your own home. In that trust, life begins to meet you halfway. Synchronicities appear not as miracles, but as natural expressions of harmony. You meet the right people at the right time. The opportunities you once chased begin to unfold on their own. You realize that the world was never withholding from you. It was waiting for you to stop resisting it. Something ancient in you awakens, a memory beyond words that existence has always been whole. You begin to see that the purpose of your confusion was never to be solved, but to humble you, to soften you, to open you wide enough to receive what intellect could never grasp. You start to live more gently. You listen more deeply. You speak less often, but with more truth. You become less interested in convincing and more interested in understanding. You see that every person you meet is also walking their own uncertain path, trying to find peace in the mystery, and that understanding breeds compassion. You stop demanding that people be perfect because you've stopped demanding that of yourself. You stop measuring worth by success because you've seen how empty success feels when it isn't aligned with being. You stop running from silence because you've discovered that silence isn't empty, it's alive, like the pause between waves. From here, a new kind of freedom begins to take shape, not the loud freedom of rebellion, but the quiet freedom of alignment. You no longer need to resist life because you finally realize that you are not separate from it. You no longer need to search for meaning because you've become meaning itself, unfolding, breathing, existing without needing a reason. You start to see that what you once called confusion was actually a grace in disguise. It stripped away what was false so that the truth could be felt, not understood. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity taking a slower, more honest form. Now, every ordinary act becomes sacred. Washing a dish, watching the rain, sitting with someone in silence. You feel the same intelligence moving through all of it, not above or beyond life, but within it. You realize that enlightenment was never about escaping the world. It was about coming home to it, as it is. You may still wake up some mornings feeling uncertain, but that no longer frightens you. You've learned to recognize it as a sign that you're alive, because certainty is the end of curiosity, and curiosity is the pulse of existence itself. You begin to thank the very uncertainty you once cursed, because you see how it's guided every step of your journey, not through control, but through connection. It kept you awake, it kept you humble, it kept you human, and perhaps that's the most profound discovery of all, that being human was never a mistake to overcome, but the miracle you were meant to embody. When you stop knowing, you start living. When you stop trying to arrive, you begin to arrive everywhere. When you stop seeking the divine outside of life, you realize it's been hiding inside every moment you ignored. The truth you've been searching for isn't hidden in books or philosophies. It's in the way your breath moves when you finally stop rushing. It's in the warmth of a sunrise you almost missed. It's in the quiet ache that reminds you how deeply you can still feel. Not knowing what you're doing anymore was never the end. It was the invitation, the doorway, the call back to what's real. And maybe that's all awakening truly is, remembering what you already knew before the world taught you to forget. Because the moment you stop demanding that life makes sense, it suddenly does not in logic, but in wonder. Not in certainty, but in peace. You smile, not because everything is perfect, but because it doesn't need to be. You're no longer waiting to begin. You already have. When life feels too heavy, it is not because the world has changed. It is because we have been carrying things that were never meant to be carried in the first place. There is a quiet burden that sits on the shoulders of so many of us, and it is not always obvious at first. We think it is the work we must do, the deadlines we must meet, the expectations we cannot escape. We think it is the people around us, the constant noise, the opinions that swirl through our lives. But the heaviest weight is often invisible. It is the weight we give to our own thoughts, to our own judgments, to the relentless pressure we place upon ourselves to be someone we think we ought to be. It is exhausting, and it can leave us feeling isolated, as though no one understands how heavy the air feels, how difficult it is to rise each day and face the responsibilities that pile upon us. It is important to notice these feelings, to allow yourself to recognize them. Many people try to push them aside or convince themselves that they are weak if they cannot bear the strain. They distract themselves with busy work, with noise, with small victories that never quite reach the heart of the problem. The burden remains because it is not about the tasks, it is about the way we relate to life itself. We try to control it, to shape it, to bend it to our will, and when life refuses to cooperate, we feel frustration, despair, and a sense of futility. You might think that if you could just be stronger or more disciplined or more capable, that the weight would lift, but it does not. Strength is not the answer in the way we have been taught to believe. Strength is not about holding on more tightly or pushing harder. Strength is about seeing clearly and learning when to release, when to let go, when to stop trying to carry what is not yours to carry. There is a curious paradox in life that so many of us miss. We think that life is a problem to solve when it is not. We think that the right way to live is to struggle against the current when the current is not our enemy. It is a river flowing, and we are swimming within it. When we resist, we exhaust ourselves. When we allow ourselves to move with it, even in small ways, we discover a rhythm, a subtle intelligence that exists beyond the effort of our minds. This does not mean giving up or abandoning responsibility. It means recognizing that there is a natural order to things, and that sometimes our attempts to force outcomes create more suffering than the circumstances themselves. Take a moment to remember a time when you were overwhelmed, and yet something shifted without your effort. Perhaps it was the sun breaking through a cloudy morning, the voice of a friend, speaking a simple truth, or even a moment of silence that allowed your mind to rest. In those brief instants, there is a hint of what it feels like to release the weight. It is not about removing all challenges, but about changing the way we encounter them. Life can be demanding, but we do not have to meet it with endless resistance. There is a choice in how we respond, a space to breathe, a pause between what happens and how we react. In that space, the weight loses its oppressive quality, and we discover that we have always been capable of moving through difficulty more lightly than we imagined. Most of us fear that if we let go, we will fall. We are taught to think that holding on tightly is the measure of care, of dedication, of love. Yet the opposite is true in so many ways. There is freedom in releasing the compulsion to control. There is clarity in seeing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. Our minds are often filled with stories of what should have been, who should have done what, how the world ought to operate, and in believing these stories, we carry unnecessary burdens. Step back and observe them. Notice the tension in your body, the contraction in your chest, the tightness in your jaw. These are signals that you are carrying weight that is not inherent in the moment. Awareness alone begins to lighten the load, because to be conscious of the burden is to no longer be trapped by it. Consider the way a tree stands through a storm. The branches bend with the wind. The trunk sways without breaking. The tree does not fight the storm, but moves with it. We humans often imagine that resilience requires rigidity, that we must remain unyielding. Yet, true resilience is the capacity to bend without fracturing, to adapt without losing one's essence. There is elegance in this approach to life, an ease that comes from understanding that we do not need to dominate every circumstance. We only need to meet it with awareness, with presence, with a gentle attention that honors both the challenge and our capacity to endure. It can be helpful to imagine setting down invisible bags that we carry, one by one, acknowledging the contents of each and asking yourself if it is yours to carry. Guilt that is inherited responsibility for outcomes that were never under your control, and expectations placed upon you by others often weigh heavily. Recognize them and allow them to exist without clinging. Let them settle around you like leaves in a stream. They are part of the landscape, but they do not need to become your weight. In this simple act, we begin to glimpse the possibility of living with a lighter heart and a more spacious mind. There is also a need to consider the flow of time. Many of us live as though the past is a burden we must bear indefinitely. We replay mistakes over and over in our minds. We imagine regrets as anchors that hold us down. Yet the past is unchangeable, and what matters is the present moment, the space in which we can act, choose, and move. To carry yesterday with us as if it defines who we are only increases the pressure. Let go of the stories you tell yourself about failure and loss. They are part of life, but they are not the sum of your being. Your life is happening now, and even amidst heaviness, there are moments of relief that are accessible if you allow yourself to notice them. Even the body carries weight in ways that mirror the mind. Shoulders tight, stomach knotted, chest contracted, jaw clenched. These tensions are signals not just of stress, but of the refusal to let life move naturally. Practices of gentle awareness, of noticing breath, of stretching without force, can serve as reminders that the body is capable of releasing as the mind is capable of surrendering. Each exhale becomes a small letting go. Each pause in thought a subtle relief. The process does not need to be dramatic, it does not need to be complete. Small movements, small recognitions accumulate into a profound transformation over time. There is a universality to this experience. Everyone at some point feels overwhelmed by existence, by the responsibilities of life, by the weight of expectations. The realization that life itself is not against us, but is instead a flow we inhabit, can bring a deep sense of comfort. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are not failing for struggling. The heaviness is a signal, an invitation to awaken to the possibility of a different relationship with life, a more spacious and forgiving one. Look at the people around you and you will see the same subtle burdens reflected in posture, in speech, in quiet sighs. We are all learning how to navigate a world that often asks too much while offering so little clarity in return. To carry this understanding with compassion toward yourself and others is a powerful act. It reminds you that you are human and that the shared experience of life is both heavy and luminous, both difficult and extraordinary. Allow yourself to feel this truth fully. There is no shame in recognizing heaviness. There is no failure in admitting that you cannot carry everything. Awareness alone begins to dissolve the illusion that you must. When you pause to breathe, to observe, to release even slightly, you create space for life to move through you with less strain. It is in this movement that we find subtle joy even in hardship, relief even in challenge, and the possibility of connecting with life without the constant sense of struggle. The act of letting go does not mean abandoning life or responsibility. It means understanding the difference between what requires your presence and effort and what is simply the flow of existence around you. By discerning between these two, by gently releasing what is unnecessary, you cultivate freedom. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of needless resistance. It is the discovery that even amidst the weight, life can have moments of lightness that are tangible, real, and accessible. It is in these moments that we glimpse the deeper truth of living. We see that heaviness is not the end, that struggle is not a permanent state, that life is not something to be endured, but something to be experienced. And in this recognition, the heart softens, the mind relaxes, and the body unwinds. We become participants in life rather than captives of it. Every day offers small opportunities to practice this awareness. A walk in nature, listening deeply to a friend, noticing a sunset, or simply sitting with your breath. Each is a reminder that even if life feels heavy, we can meet it with presence. We can allow it to move through us rather than weigh upon us. Each small act of noticing, of breathing, of releasing, is a step toward living lightly, even in a world that often asks us to bear more than we can. Take a moment now to acknowledge the heaviness you feel. Observe it. Name it if you can. And then imagine it dissolving into the flow of life, not disappearing suddenly, but gently easing away. Notice how your posture shifts, how your chest opens slightly, how the mind feels a bit clearer. These small shifts are powerful. They remind you that heaviness is not a permanent identity. You are not the weight you carry. You are the awareness that notices it. This chapter has explored the subtle burdens we carry, the invisible pressures that weigh on us, and the ways awareness and surrender can begin to lighten the load. There is more to discover in this journey. In the next chapter, we will explore the deeper philosophical and spiritual dimensions of releasing heaviness and finding a profound sense of freedom and ease in life. Consider for a moment how much of your life is spent trying to control things that are inherently uncontrollable. We try to dictate the behavior of others, to predict outcomes, to prevent mistakes, to manage what is beyond our grasp. This is exhausting. The mind becomes a battlefield of endless strategizing, and the heart becomes tense with worry. Yet there is a remarkable shift when we recognize that life flows in ways we cannot fully anticipate. There is freedom in releasing the compulsion to force every outcome, and in trusting that even within uncertainty there is a pattern, a rhythm, a subtle order that can guide us if we are attentive. The pressure of life often comes from comparing our journey to others. We measure our success, our worth, our progress against people who walk different paths with different circumstances. Comparison is a weight that is entirely optional. When we stop measuring ourselves against others and begin to observe our own path, we discover a deeper alignment with who we are. Our goals, our joys, our struggles become unique expressions of life, unfolding in its own way. We are not failing if we do not meet arbitrary standards. We are participating in the natural flow of our own existence. It is important to remember that heaviness is not a punishment. It is a signal. It is life inviting us to pause, to look more closely, to reconsider how we are moving through it. The pressure, the fatigue, the sense of being overwhelmed can all become teachers. If we meet them with curiosity rather than resistance, we begin to understand their purpose. They reveal what we value, what we fear, what we are clinging to, and what we can gently release. One way to practice this is through noticing the small sensations in the body. Life's heaviness often manifests physically as tension in the shoulders, a tightness in the chest, a constriction in the jaw. By turning attention toward these sensations and simply observing them without judgment, we create a pause. In that pause, the weight begins to shift. The mind begins to follow the body, and a small sense of ease emerges. It does not require heroic effort. It requires attention, presence, and a willingness to allow life to move through us rather than be blocked by us. Another dimension of releasing heaviness is understanding the nature of thought itself. Thoughts are not commands, they are phenomena. They arise and fade like clouds passing through the sky. We often mistake them for reality and cling to them as if they are the truth. This clinging creates tension. By noticing thoughts as transient and letting them pass without resistance, we free ourselves from the unnecessary weight they impose. Awareness of the mind's movement is the beginning of liberation. There is a simple metaphor that may help. Imagine a bird carrying a small stone in its claw. The bird flies, but the stone weighs it down. Now imagine the bird letting go of the stone. The bird does not stop flying. It does not fall. It soars with ease and grace. Life is much the same. The stones we clutch are often optional. Recognizing them and releasing them allows us to move more lightly, more freely, more joyfully through the currents of existence. It is also essential to consider our relationship with time. Many people carry the past as if it were a heavy load they cannot leave behind. Regret, guilt, and sorrow become anchors that impede movement. Similarly, fear of the future creates tension and anxiety. True ease emerges when we inhabit the present moment fully. The present is where life unfolds. It is where choice and action are possible. By dwelling in now, even briefly, we release the weight of what was and the worry of what might be. This does not mean forgetting lessons from the past or ignoring the future. It means engaging with them without attachment. We can learn from experience without being defined by it. We can plan for the future without being consumed by it. The heaviness of life is diminished when we distinguish between what is immediate and what is imagined. Presence is the key that unlocks relief. There is also a relational dimension to consider. Many of the weights we carry involve others, expectations, judgments, and attachments can burden us. By observing our relationships with compassion and honesty, we can release unnecessary strain. We do not need to fix others or conform to their desires. We can engage authentically without absorbing their weight as our own. Boundaries, when practiced with care, are not limitations but liberations. They allow us to move through life without accumulating needless pressure. Even in the midst of challenge, there is room for joy. The moments that surprise us, the laughter that bubbles unexpectedly, the beauty that reveals itself in ordinary life, all remind us that life is not entirely heavy. By learning to notice these moments, we cultivate a counterbalance to pressure. Joy does not cancel difficulty, but it softens it. It creates space between the weight and ourselves and reminds us that existence has many dimensions, many rhythms, many textures. Spiritual insight deepens this understanding. In most philosophical traditions, the idea is the same life is not something to dominate, but something to participate in. There is a flow, an intelligence, a current that we are part of, whether we acknowledge it or not. Resistance creates struggle. Engagement without clinging creates freedom. When we recognize that we are not separate from life, that life is not an enemy to be conquered, the heaviness begins to dissolve. Presence, awareness, and acceptance become tools of liberation. Practice can take many forms. Meditation, mindful walking, listening deeply to another person, observing nature, or even simply breathing consciously, all remind us of this truth. The practices are not magic. They do not erase difficulty. They reveal our capacity to meet it differently. Each moment of noticing, each act of letting go, accumulates into profound change. Over time, the constant background weight of life diminishes, and we discover a quieter, lighter, more spacious way of being. It is helpful to remember that heaviness is not a personal failing. Everyone experiences it. Everyone at times feels overwhelmed. By observing this universality, we connect with others and with ourselves. Compassion for ourselves and for the shared human experience softens tension. It is a gentle reminder that difficulty is part of life, that it is not a reflection of inadequacy, and that release is always possible. The process of lightening life's weight is continuous. It requires patience, kindness, and persistence. Small moments matter. Pauses in thought, moments of attention to breath, brief acknowledgements of sensation and feeling, noticing joy and beauty, practicing presence in everyday tasks, observing the impermanence of thoughts and emotions, and engaging with life without rigid attachment, all of these contribute. The river flows, and we learn to move with it rather than against it. As we conclude this reflection, know that life's heaviness is not permanent. It is a condition that invites awareness, presence, and release. The pressures, the fears, the burdens, all serve as teachers if we meet them consciously. Step into the flow, observe the weight without clinging, breathe deeply, allow life to move through you. And in doing so, discover the subtle freedom, the gentle ease, and the profound lightness that is always available when we stop resisting and start participating. Even as you face responsibilities and challenges, even as you feel the pull of expectations and pressures, remember this: you are not the weight you carry. You are the awareness that notices it. And awareness has the capacity to release, to soften, to lighten, and to move through life with grace. This is not a promise of a perfect life. Life will remain complex and sometimes difficult, but it is a promise of freedom from unnecessary struggle and a reminder that even when life feels too heavy, it is possible to experience relief, clarity, and presence. Take a moment now to breathe, to notice, and to feel the difference that small awareness brings. You are not alone in this. Everyone navigates the currents of life, And in noticing the weight, releasing what is optional, and engaging fully with the present, we participate in life rather than being crushed by it. There is no final destination. There is only the journey and the manner in which we move through it. Let it be lighter, let it be conscious, let it be present, and let it be deeply, profoundly your own. It is rather peculiar how most conversations begin. Someone says, "Hi, how are you?" And without much thought, the other replies, "I'm fine, how are you?" The words slip out like coins from a machine. They keep the gears of social ritual turning, but they rarely touch the depth of what it means to truly meet another human being. Now, there is nothing wrong with politeness. Ritual has its place. But when every meeting begins with phrases emptied of life, we find ourselves living among shadows. Words pass back and forth, but the connection is missing. The one speaking is not really there, and the one hearing is not really touched. And so, surrounded by people, we remain alone. You see, words are not merely sounds. They are carriers of presence. And when they are spoken without presence, they become like husks, shells without fruit. To meet another being only through such husks is to miss the very thing you were longing for, the spark of life that leaps between two souls when they are awake to each other. Think of how music works. A musician may play the correct notes in the correct order with mechanical precision. But if there is no feeling, no breath, no willingness to risk, then what is played is only sound, not music. Another musician, perhaps less skilled, may sit at the same instrument and with a kind of playful freshness, touch the keys in a way that makes the whole room vibrate with life. The difference is not in the notes, but in the presence. So it is with speech. To open your mouth and speak automatically, repeating phrases you have said 1,000 times before, is like the lifeless musician striking notes without hearing them. To speak with presence, however, even with the simplest words, is like allowing music to arise in the space between you. It is felt instantly. Others may not know why, but they will remember you. The ordinary greeting, "Hi, how are you?" is not a sin, but it is often a disguise. It pretends to be connection when, in truth, it is absence. How many times has someone asked you this question, and you began to answer sincerely, only to notice their eyes already wandering elsewhere? In that moment, the words are revealed for what they are, not a request for truth, but a reflex, a habit. But imagine something else. Imagine meeting someone who does not hide behind the ritual, who is there with you in silence for a moment before the first word appears. Imagine they notice the look in your eye, or the way the sunlight touches your shoulder, and they begin there. Suddenly, you feel it, this person is awake. They are not running on autopilot. They are alive. It is not cleverness that draws us to such people. It is not charm in the shallow sense. It is presence. When someone speaks from presence, even the smallest word carries the weight of reality. It is alive, and because it is alive, it awakens life in us. Most people believe attraction is about tricks and techniques, the right line, the perfect image, the calculated move. But all of that is surface. What truly attracts is aliveness. To be awake in the midst of a world half asleep is magnetic. You need not try to impress. The very fact of being present is enough. Consider how we so often confuse the menu with the meal. A menu is useful. It points to the food. But no one in their right mind would sit at a table and attempt to eat the menu itself. And yet, in conversation, this is what happens when words are used without presence. How are you becomes like reading roast duck with orange sauce aloud without ever tasting it. So when I say, never say, "Hi, how are you?" I do not mean it as a literal command. I mean, do not use words as a substitute for presence. Do not let them become empty gestures that hide the fact that you are not truly there. To meet another person is an event so extraordinary that no formula could ever contain it. For here is the truth. Each meeting, no matter how ordinary, is unique. This moment with this person has never been before and will never be again. To greet someone mechanically is to treat the moment as if it were just another repetition. But to greet them with awareness is to honor its unrepeatable nature. And people feel that honor. They are touched by it, even if they cannot explain why. Words can be doors, or they can be walls. They can open into connection, or they can reinforce the sense of separation. It is not the dictionary definition that makes the difference, but the presence of the one who speaks. So if you wish to be felt, to be remembered, to draw others near, do not begin with autopilot phrases. Begin with life. Let even the smallest words be spoken as though for the first time. Let them carry the freshness of this moment, the only moment there is. And then, whether you speak 4 words or 40, it will not matter. What will matter is that you are here. And when you are here, the other cannot help but feel it. For the most irresistible quality in the world is simply to be awake. What, then, are these 4 words that can change the way you are received, the way you are remembered, the way another responds to you? They are not magical in themselves. You see, there are no incantations, no secret phrases that bend the will of others like spells. But there are words that, when spoken from presence, carry a power because they awaken presence in the one who hears them. The 4 words are these. It's good to see you. Notice the difference. To say, how are you, places the other in a position where they must report, summarize, justify, or perform. But to say, it's good to see you, is to make no demand. It is to acknowledge the simple miracle that they are here, and that you are here, and that, for this brief moment, your lives have touched. And when you speak these words with sincerity, something changes in the air. For in that instant, you are no longer strangers maintaining the ritual of civility. You are fellow beings, meeting. The words open a door because they carry no pressure, no expectation. They affirm rather than inquire. They receive rather than demand. And people are drawn to this like plants to the sunday. Now, of course, you could take these same words and drain them of life. You could mutter them with the same automatic tone as how are you, and they would fall flat, for the power is never in the syllables themselves. It is always in the state of being from which they are spoken. But when the words rise naturally from presence, they act as a kind of mirror. They say to the other, I see you. I acknowledge that you exist, not as a concept, not as a role, but as you, here, now. And that is the most irresistible message of all. For what we long for, deeper than any flattery, deeper than any compliment, is to be seen, not as an image, not as a mask, but as we are. And when someone sees us in this way, even briefly, we feel ourselves expand. We feel lighter, freer, more at home. That is attraction in its most fundamental form, the recognition of being. It is a curious paradox that to attract others, one must stop trying to attract them. For as long as you are trying, as long as you are manipulating or strategizing, there is a tension. You are not at ease, and others sense it. But when you speak simply from the fact of presence, there is no trying, there is only being. And being is magnetic. This is why certain people seem to glow when they enter a room. It is not their clothes, their beauty, their cleverness. It is their ease. They are not reaching, not grasping, not clutching for attention. They are here, and because they are here, everyone else feels a little more here as well. So the 4 words, it's good to see you, are not a trick. They are a reminder to yourself as much as to the other. For when you say them, you are not only affirming the presence of the one before you, you are affirming your own. You are saying, in effect, I am awake enough to notice you and to be glad of it. And in that gladness, there is a lightness. And in that lightness, attraction blooms. Now, you may object. You may say, but what if it is not good to see them? What if I do not feel glad? And to this I say, look deeper. It may not be good to see the role they play, the mask they wear, the memory they stir in you, but beneath all that, the fact remains. Here is another fragment of the universe. Here is another wave of the great ocean, meeting you in this moment. And in that meeting, there is always something to be glad of, even if it is only the fact that you both exist side by side for a flicker of time. For consider how astonishing it is that anyone exists at all. That you exist, that I exist, that consciousness has taken form as this particular pattern, this particular face, this particular voice. When you see it in this way, every meeting is miraculous. To acknowledge it is not flattery, but truth. And so you begin to notice that the words you speak are less about communication in the conventional sense and more about recognition. You are not exchanging information, you are exchanging presence. The syllables are only carriers. What they carry is being. This is why, if you rely on empty formulas, you may be heard but not felt. And if you speak simply from presence, even the smallest phrase becomes radiant. To say, it's good to see you, with sincerity, is to participate in that radiance. It is to let another feel that life itself is worth noticing, worth affirming. And once you begin to live in this way, you discover that attraction is not something you generate. It is something that happens. It is the natural consequence of being awake. Just as flowers do not try to attract bees, and yet bees come, so too does presence attract attention, not by effort, but by being what it is. The deeper secret, however, is that the attraction you create in others is only a reflection of the attraction you begin to feel toward life itself. When you see another and say, it's good to see you, you are training your own vision to notice the goodness, the beauty, the miracle of the world around you. You are cultivating a habit of presence, and soon you find yourself not only attracting others, but attracting life opportunities, insights, synchronicities, moments of grace. So perhaps the 4 words are less important than the spirit in which they are spoken. For there are countless other ways to say the same thing. You might say, I'm glad you're here. You might say, wonderful to meet you. You might simply smile in a way that carries the same energy. The words themselves may change, but the essence is the same: to recognize, to affirm, to be present. And this is why we must be careful not to turn the phrase itself into another formula. If you repeat, it's good to see you, without awareness, it will soon be no different from, hi, how are you? The life will have gone out of it. The secret is not in the sound, but in the being. The 4 words are only a doorway. What matters is that you walk through it. So then, if you wish to attract others, if you wish to leave behind the fog of forgettable interactions, begin not with tricks, not with manipulation, but with presence. Begin with words that are alive. Begin with the recognition that every meeting is unique, unrepeatable, miraculous, and let your language reflect that. For when you do, you will find that people remember you, not because you dazzled them, but because they felt seen. They will be drawn to you, not because you impressed them, but because they felt alive in your presence. That is the deepest attraction of all, to awaken life in one another. And so, let these 4 words serve as a reminder, not a formula. Let them remind you that the secret of connection, the secret of attraction, the secret of being unforgettable is simply to be here, to be alive, to let your words carry the fragrance of that aliveness. Then, whether you say, it's good to see you, or any other phrase that arises naturally, it will not matter. What matters is that you are not speaking from habit, but from the truth of this moment. And the truth of this moment is always enough. So, when you next meet another person, pause for a moment. Notice them. Notice yourself. Let the words come, not from memory, but from life itself. And when you say, "It's good to see you," or whatever form it takes, let it be real. For in that realness lies the power to attract, to connect, and to awaken. And then, perhaps, you will see that the real secret is not how to attract others, but how to awaken to the beauty of being itself. For when you are awake to that, attraction follows naturally, as light draws the eye, as music draws the ear, as love draws the heart.
You know, there's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs when someone begins to wake up, when someone starts to see through the game that everyone else is playing. And that is, they become frightening to other people. Now, why should this be? Why should clarity be threatening? Why should someone who sees deeply into the nature of things make others uncomfortable? Well, let me tell you, it's one of the most interesting aspects of human psychology. And it reveals something very profound about the way we organize our collective lives, our societies, our very sense of who we are. You see, most people are living in what I call a mutual conspiracy. We've all agreed, tacitly, unconsciously, to believe certain things about reality. We've agreed that the emperor is wearing clothes, even though he's quite naked. We've agreed that this piece of paper called money has value. We've agreed that these arbitrary lines on a map called borders are real and important. We've agreed that you are you and I am I, and we're separate, isolated individuals competing for scarce resources in a hostile universe. Now, none of these things are fundamentally true. They're conventions, agreements, useful fictions that allow us to organize society and get along with each other. But we've forgotten that they're fictions. We've mistaken the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. And we live our entire lives inside this agreed-upon hallucination, never questioning it, never looking behind the curtain. Then along comes someone who has seen through it, someone who has realized that the emperor has no clothes, someone who has awakened from the collective dream. And what does this person do? Well, if they're wise, they might say nothing at all. They might simply smile and go about their business. But even their silence, even their smile, can be deeply unsettling to others. Because you see, when you encounter someone who has seen through the game, something inside you recognizes it. Some part of you knows that they know something you've been trying very hard not to know. They represent a threat to your entire framework of reality, your entire sense of security and identity. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a theater, watching a film, completely absorbed in the story. You're identifying with the hero, you're afraid of the villain, you're emotionally invested in the outcome. Then someone leans over and whispers, "You know, it's just actors on a screen. None of this is real." How do you feel? Annoyed, probably. You don't want to be reminded that it's just a film. You want to stay in the illusion because the illusion is entertaining, it's engaging, it gives you something to feel strongly about. Now, multiply that by 1,000, and you begin to understand why people fear those who see too much. Because what these awakened individuals see is that everything, not just the film in the theater, but your job, your relationships, your ambitions, your fears, your entire life story is in a certain sense not as real as you think it is. It's a role you're playing, a character you're performing, a dream you're dreaming. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to be told that what they're taking so seriously is fundamentally a game, a play, a cosmic joke. Because if it's just a game, then what have they been doing all these years? All that striving, all that suffering, all those achievements and failures, were they for nothing? The awakened person seems to threaten the very meaning of your existence. But there's something even deeper going on. You see, our entire social structure is built on people taking the game seriously. Civilization requires that people show up to their jobs, pay their taxes, follow the rules, pursue success, fear failure, and generally behave as if all of this matters in some ultimate, absolute sense. The system needs you to be asleep, to be hypnotized, to be convinced that the symbols and abstractions we've created are real and important. Someone who has awakened from this trance is dangerous to the system, not because they're going to rebel or cause trouble, necessarily quite the opposite. They might be perfectly content and peaceful, but their very existence, their very presence, reminds others that there's a way out of the trap. They're like someone who has escaped from prison and come back to visit. The prisoners don't want to see them because it reminds them that the prison bars are, in a sense, optional. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeating. The awakened ones, the seers, the prophets, the mystics, they're consistently marginalized, ridiculed, persecuted, or killed. Not always, of course. Sometimes they're tolerated, sometimes they're even venerated, but usually only after they're safely dead and their teachings have been domesticated and made harmless. But while they're alive, while they're actually demonstrating that another way of being is possible, they make people very nervous. Think of Socrates, who was condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. What was his crime, really? He was asking questions, encouraging people to think for themselves, to examine their assumptions, to see through the conventional beliefs of society. And for this he had to drink hemlock. The authorities couldn't tolerate someone showing the young people that the emperor had no clothes. Or think of Jesus, who was crucified essentially for the same reason. He was pointing to a reality beyond the religious and political structures of his time. He was saying that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you don't need priests or temples or elaborate rituals to connect with the divine. This was tremendously threatening to the establishment, both religious and political, because if people realized this, the whole power structure would collapse. The person who sees too much reveals something that most people desperately want to keep hidden, even from themselves. They reveal that you are not who you think you are. That little voice in your head that you call I, that anxious, worried, ambitious entity that's always trying to get somewhere or become something that's not you. That's just a thought pattern, a habit of mind, a character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten it's a character. What you really are is much vaster, much more mysterious, much more free than this little ego identity. You are the consciousness in which all of this appears. You are not separate from the world, from the universe, from existence itself. You are what the whole cosmos is doing at this particular place and time, just as a wave is what the whole ocean is doing at a particular place and time. But this realization, this seeing, undermines everything that society has taught you about who you are and what you should be doing with your life. It undermines the whole story of progress and achievement and making something of yourself. Because if you're already it, if you're already the universe experiencing itself, then what is there to achieve? Where is there to go? Now, don't misunderstand me. The awakened person doesn't become passive or lazy or irresponsible. Quite the contrary. They often become more engaged with life, more creative, more compassionate. But they're playing the game of life knowingly, consciously, without being trapped by it. They're dancing, but they know they're dancing. And this knowledge, this freedom, is what others find so threatening. Because if you're around someone like this for any length of time, something starts to happen. The certainty you had about your beliefs begins to wobble. The stories you've been telling yourself start to sound a bit hollow. The fears and desires that have been driving you begin to lose their grip. And this is terrifying because these beliefs, these stories, these fears and desires, they're what you've been using to navigate life. They're your map. And if the map is wrong, if it's just a fiction, then you're lost. The person who sees too much doesn't even have to say anything directly challenging. Their very being, their very presence, emanates a kind of freedom that exposes the bondage others are in. It's like someone walking around without chains in a prison where everyone else is shackled. The shackled prisoners don't feel grateful, they feel accused. They feel judged, even though no judgment is being made. This is why awakened individuals often learn to hide their light, so to speak. They learn to speak in parables and paradoxes, to couch their insights in acceptable language, to appear more conventional than they are, because they've learned that most people aren't ready to hear the truth. Most people are too invested in their illusions, too identified with their roles, too afraid of the freedom that comes with seeing through the game. And, there's a kind of violence in waking someone up before they're ready. If someone is having a pleasant dream, you don't shake them awake unless the house is on fire. The person who sees too much understands this. They understand that awakening happens in its own time, that you can't force it, that everyone is exactly where they need to be in their journey. But still, their very existence is a kind of invitation, a possibility, a door standing open. And for those who are ready, who are beginning to question their own dream, who are starting to feel that something isn't quite right with the official version of reality for these people, encountering someone who has seen through the veil can be life-changing. It can be the catalyst for their own awakening. However, for those who aren't ready, who are deeply invested in the dream, who have built their entire identity and sense of security on the collective hallucination for these people, the awakened individual is a threat that must be neutralized. And society has many ways of doing this. The most obvious way is simply to ignore them, to dismiss them as crazy or impractical or naive. Oh, that's all very nice and mystical, people say, but you can't live that way in the real world. You've got bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, a life to live. As if the awakened person isn't living. As if they're somehow less engaged with reality rather than more engaged. But you see, this dismissal reveals the real fear. What if they're right? What if there is another way to live that doesn't involve all this striving and suffering and anxiety? What if you could be in the world fully without being of it, without being trapped by it? This possibility is so threatening that it must be dismissed immediately, without examination. Another way society deals with those who see too much is to try to capture them, to domesticate them, to turn them into another part of the system. Oh, you've had a spiritual experience? Wonderful. Why don't you write a book about it? Give some lectures. Start a retreat center. And before you know it, the person who saw through the game has become a player in a new game, a spiritual seeking game, which can be just as much of a trap as any other game. Or society might try to explain away their insights. Oh, you think you've awakened? That's just a neurological phenomenon, or a psychological state, or the result of meditation practice, as if giving it a label somehow diminishes it, somehow makes it safe and manageable and less threatening. But these labels are just more concepts, more ways of avoiding the direct encounter with what is. The deepest fear that people have about those who see too much is not that they're wrong, but that they're right, that there really is another way of experiencing reality. That the anxiety and suffering and endless striving that characterizes most human life is not necessary, not inevitable, not the price we have to pay for being conscious beings. Because if that's true, then you've been had. You've been living in a prison of your own making. You've been taking seriously what doesn't need to be taken seriously, and ignoring what really matters. You've been, in the words of Thoreau, living a life of quiet desperation when you could have been dancing. And nobody wants to realize this. It's too painful. It's easier to dismiss the awakened ones as deluded, impractical, or dangerous than to consider that they might be seeing something you're missing. It's easier to stay in the comfortable prison of your familiar suffering than to step into the terrifying freedom of not knowing who you are. But here's the beautiful paradox. The awakened person isn't actually threatening you. They're not trying to take anything from you or impose anything on you. In fact, they see you more clearly and compassionately than you see yourself. They see that you're playing a role, yes, but they also see what's behind the role, the same consciousness, the same awareness, the same fundamental being that they've discovered in themselves. They see that you're afraid, and they understand why. They see that you're suffering, and they have compassion. They see that you're lost in the dream, and they remember what that's like because they were lost too once. They're not judging you. They're simply being what they are. And their being serves as a mirror in which you might, if you dare to look, see your own true nature reflected. The fear that people feel toward those who see too much is really the fear of their own freedom. It's the fear of discovering that they've been playing a game all along that they could have stopped any time they wanted. It's the fear of responsibility, not the conventional responsibility of paying bills and meeting obligations, but the deeper responsibility of being the author of your own experience, the creator of your own reality. You see, as long as you believe that reality is fixed and solid and you're just a small, separate individual trying to survive in it, then you're off the hook. You can blame circumstances, other people, your past, your genetics, society, anything. But if you wake up and see that you are not separate from reality, that you are reality experiencing itself, then suddenly you can't blame anyone or anything. You are it. And that's a terrifying realization for most people. The person who sees too much has accepted this responsibility. They've stopped arguing with reality, stopped resisting what is, stopped pretending to be other than what they are. And in that acceptance, in that surrender, they've found a kind of freedom that others can scarcely imagine. Not freedom from circumstances. They still have bodies that get sick, relationships that have difficulties, problems to solve. But freedom from the psychological suffering that comes from resistance, from wanting things to be different than they are, from identifying with a separate self that must constantly defend and promote itself. This freedom is attractive and terrifying in equal measure. It's attractive because everyone wants to be free of suffering. But it's terrifying because it requires dying, not physically, but psychologically. It requires the death of the ego, the death of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what life is about. And nobody wants to die, even metaphorically, even when that death would lead to a greater life. So people fear those who see too much because they represent a kind of death, the death of illusion, the death of the familiar, the death of the known. But they also represent a kind of birth, the birth into reality, into presence, into your true nature. And birth, like death, is frightening, even when it's exactly what needs to happen. The tragedy is that this fear causes people to miss the very thing they most deeply long for. Beneath all the striving and achieving and worrying and planning, there's a deep longing for peace, for wholeness, for coming home to yourself. The person who sees too much has found that home, not by going anywhere or becoming anything, but simply by waking up to what they already are. And their message, though it's often unspoken, is simply this: you can wake up too. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to take the dream so seriously. You don't have to spend your whole life trying to become something other than what you already are. You are it. You've always been it. You could never be anything else. But this message, this truth, is too simple, too immediate, too obvious. People want something more complicated, more difficult, more distant. They want a path to follow, a goal to achieve, something to do. And the awakened person says, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do because you're already there and you're already doing it. And people find this infuriating because it pulls the rug out from under their entire project of self-improvement and spiritual seeking. So they fear those who see too much, because these awakened ones reveal the cosmic joke, the divine comedy, the ultimate irony, that what you're seeking is what's seeking, that the seeker is the sought, that you are what you're looking for. And once you get the joke, once you really see it, you can't help but laugh. But until you get it, the laughter of the awakened sounds like mockery, and their peace looks like indifference, and their freedom feels like an accusation.